Welcome to the Pucks with Haggs podcast, a proud member of the CLNS Media Network. Make sure to hit the subscribe button to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel and turn on notifications for when a new video drops on the channel. This show is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. This is the 208th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Thank you, as always, for joining in, listening, interacting, commenting, leaving questions, all of that good stuff. I am your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe and get yourself a premium membership. Get all of my Bruins and NHL writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also write columns 3 times a week for the Boston Sports Journal, so go to bostonsportsjournal.com, get a membership there. You can be a part of the weekly Q&A I do with the fans, as well as writing those columns. So it's a great place for all the Boston sports and to get insight and news and original content, not aggregate, not anything like that. Original stuff from people covering the teams over at bostonsportsjournal.com. So definitely check that out as well. This is going to be a mailbag episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. We're going to answer some questions. It's going to be a solo journey with me. We'll get back to the regular format next week. But this is, as I think I've said before, from about July 15th until August 15th, it's really like kind of the dead portion of the hockey schedule. It's when all the NHL executives go to their cottages in Canada by the lake and go fishing, go water skiing, go to the beach. Not a lot of business gets done over the next month in the NHL. And this is when you see websites will start to come out with like their all-time teams, their top 50 players of all time, and they start going through the listicles to try to come up with stuff. So we're just going to answer a few questions here. Not any news to speak of with the Boston Bruins. I think the schedule coming out, I guess, was the biggest piece of news. And, you know, we can talk about that more next week. Maybe we'll have a podcast early in the week to talk about that. But, you know, the bottom line stuff was they're starting on the road against Washington, and it's a back-to-back. And then the next night they're going to play at home against the Blackhawks for their home opener. I think it's Wednesday, Thursday, if I remember correctly, in the beginning of October. They do have a Black Friday game against the Rangers, matinee after Thanksgiving, so that's good. I think they play the Canadiens 4 times, which is great. Some little sort of nuanced stuff like that on the schedule. But for the most part, fairly regular-looking schedule for the Bruins. They tend to be a little light in the first half of the year and then a little heavy in the second half of the year. That seems to always be the way it works out for them. I know in the old days that used to be because they had the circus coming to town, usually in the fall at some point, and they would go on the road for like 2 days. It's not really the case anymore, but still sort of follows that same pathway just a little bit. But we'll get more into the schedule next week for sure, as that was the sort of most interesting thing to come out. But for this episode, I think we will just answer some questions. I've got some questions from Twitter. I've got some questions from my Facebook fan page. I've got some questions from the Q&A I do over at Boston Sports Journal. So let's jump right in. This is from SJM1613. What is your guess at this point for opening night line combos? And there's a second part of the question. What is the likelihood that Korpisalo or other pieces get moved to shore up the middle six, or D, who might the targets be? The first one, what is your guess at this point for opening night line combos? I would say you have to start. Like, some of it's going to be based on training camp, right? Some of it's going to be based on the way things look at camp, if everybody's healthy. But I would suspect, and I would guess, that they would start with what ended well last year with Elias Lindholm centering Morgan Geekie and David Pastrnak. They looked really good the last month, 6 weeks of the season last year. As Lindholm got healthy from that back injury that he had problems with at times, he looked much better. I would say from the Four Nations tournament on, I thought he actually played really well. I know the numbers didn't bear that out completely at the beginning of when he came back from Four Nations, but I just eyeball test watching him play. I thought he was very good. much better than he was the first half of the year from Four Nations on afterward. So that would be my guesses to the top line. Why not stick with that? Try to load up on the top line. Have at least one line that is going to be dangerous all the time. That's going to be your big point producer. You're going to be able to rely on for heavy duty work at both ends, both to play against other teams' good lines, and then also to do damage offensively against other teams' good D pairs and good lines. Second line, I think I would start with Victor Arvidsson, Pavel Zacha maybe, although you might have to move Pavel Zacha over. Well, no, I think you Pavel Zacha on the left side, Victor Arvidsson on the right, and then Middlestat, I guess, at center to start. But I think you could also very easily just slide Zacha over to center with Arvidsson, and then you would have either Blumel as the winger there, the guy from the Czech who came from the Dallas Stars organization. I think he had like 39 goals in the American League last year. Has only gotten a couple of quick cups of coffee with the Stars, but signed here in a one-way deal. So you would expect that he's going to get NHL looks, plenty of them. And I think he's got at least the credentials in the AHL to be a top six guy. So I think he would get looks there as well. But I would definitely look at putting Casey Middlestat with other skill players. I think Zacha, Arvidsson, and Middlestat, some combo of those three, although I don't know how Middlestat's going to do on the wing if you wanted to put Zacha in the middle. I think you need to look at that combo in some way, because those would I would estimate as your best offensive talents that you could put together on a second line that could be somewhat dangerous or somewhat productive. I think you would have to look at that. I think Arvidsson is going to play top six. He should. I know he's coming off a so-so year with Edmonton. 2 years ago, he had a back injury that limited him when LA, but prior to that, extremely productive. A bunch of 20-goal seasons, had some 30-goal seasons, has put up points in the league. And last year, I think you could make the argument that, it was the Edmonton team that he was on that was stacked with forwards, that he had a hard time sort of getting his power play time, his minutes that he usually gets. And it was probably a struggle for him to try to produce as much as he usually does offensively, just because it was so crowded. And that can happen when you got a lot of really good offensive players on a team. But I on a team like the Bruins, where they need people to step up top six, I would fully expect that he's going to produce and give you, 20 to 25 goals, 40 to 55 points, somewhere in there, and will be a fairly productive second line guy. I think if he gives you that, that's what you're hoping for, and that's what you really need to get out of a guy like that. Beyond that, I mean, I think it's going to be kind of a toss-up, and it depends on who's playing well. I think Jeannot certainly will get third-line looks and should get third-line looks. I think Matt Poitras is a guy that will be in the mix for the third line. I think there's a number of other players that could be in the mix on the third line, but I think they're also going to be in the mix in the fourth line. Sean Kuraly, John Beecher, Kostelik, Kuznetsov, all these guys are going to sort of be thrown into the mix and see who comes. I would suspect that Kuraly is going to be your fourth line center. I would suspect, and Isamont too. Maybe Isamont on the third line to start with Jeannot, but I think those guys, I think whoever's performing best, I think will be third line, and then you'll slide other guys down to the fourth line, and it could depend on who the center is. If it's Kostelik or Kuraly as a third line center, it's going to be more of a checking line, I would guess. If it's Poitras as a third line center, you might be looking for more, or Fraser Minton, you might be looking for more of a little offensive upside, or guys that can finish a little better playing with them. But the criticism about the Bruins having three, one first line and three third lines or three fourth lines, I can see them having a legit second line based on the players that they have. But it is really indistinguishable, in my opinion, between third and fourth line. It's going to depend on who really steps up. You would think Jeannot would be a third liner. especially if he stays healthy and he can score double digits. I think he's a third line type player. Patra obviously has the talent to be a third line center in the league. And I think ultimately that's where they'd like to see him sort of break in and start to, take a full-time job. Fraser Minton, similar. I think he's another guy that has the talent to be a third line center. And the Bruins have often likened him in abilities and how they view him as a Charlie Coyle type, a guy that can win D-zone faceoffs, a guy that plays good two-way hockey, a guy that will go to the hard areas and play difficult against other teams and plays a 200-foot game. Like, there's a lot of things about Fraser Minton that you could see would dovetail nicely with being a third line center. So that's a guy I think they're going to take a long look at in camp. But it's hard to forecast the third line because I think there's so many unknowns about what could end up happening there based on the young players they have, based on the new faces they're bringing in. And that's sort of where the eyes are going to be, I think, in training camp, is particularly on the third line and trying to figure out who exactly is going to fit there, who's going to end up on the fourth line, and how that's all going to shake out to start the year. In some ways, it's good that they have, 7, 8 candidates, maybe 9 that you could look at as legit candidates for those two lines, because I think it's going to be competitive. But in other ways, if you don't have established guys there, you're rolling the dice that some guys are going to step up and really be good players for you. And there's an element to that with the Bruins this year and the players that they've brought in. But I think there's enough talent defensively, goaltending, and in the top two lines. And if Steve Spott really can come in and get that power play cranking, I think it's going to be okay. I think they're going to get enough goals while they sort out the third and fourth line. I think that's something that they can sort of deal with on the fly and figure it out as they're going along, and they will find combinations that work. That's why I'm not quite as down on this team as some people are. And as far as what they're going to be this year and how they're going to do, I think they're going to be okay. I don't think they're going to be terrible. I certainly don't think they're going to be giving up in games on the road and giving up 9-10 goals and some of the stuff we saw last year where they were just basically, waving the white flag and punting in the middle of a game. You're not going to see that with the team this year. I don't think. I really don't, with the changes that they made, the players they brought in, and the mandate from management on being a harder out. I don't think you're going to see that at all. So it's my best guess at opening night combos, but we'll see how things develop and how things happen with injuries. What is the likelihood that Korpisalo or other pieces get moved to shore up the middle six or the D? Who might the targets be? I don't think there's any likelihood at all that Korpisalo gets moved. I don't think there's a market for him. I honestly don't. In order to trade him, in order to trade a guy with a $3 million cap hit that's a backup goalie, he has to be good. He's not coming off a good year. He had some okay moments, but the final numbers were not great. And you're not going to get somebody. It's going to be a straight salary dump if you try to move him somewhere else, where you're taking on the money and or you're giving up draft picks to send him somewhere else. There is not a market for Korpisalo. There really isn't at this point, and I don't think there ever was. He needs to play better if you're going to flip him. I understand that for 2 years now, Bruins fans have been talking about trading Korpisalo. You can't trade him if he's coming off either bad years like it was 2 years ago or so-so years like last year. He needs to actually perform well in the job that he's doing if he's going to have a market and if he's going to have value and if a team is going to trade for him and take on the contract that he has and not expect you to send a sweetener of a draft pick along with him. It's basic NHL 101. It's just being realistic. You're not being realistic if you think there's a market for a backup goalie that's coming off one bad year and one mediocre year. There's just not. There's too many other good goalies out there that can do the job. And you don't have to give up assets in order to bring them in, and you're not going to have to pay them what you're going to have to pay Korpisalo. That's the bottom line. If you really think about it objectively, it doesn't make sense that there's a market for Korpisalo, and that's why there isn't, because there shouldn't be. So there's no likelihood that Korpisalo gets moved. The likelihood that another piece gets moved to shore up the middle six or the D, I don't think so. I don't think you can trade Middlestat either. He's coming off a real bad stretch after he got traded from Colorado to Boston, and he's now been traded a couple times. He's been on 3 teams in the last 2 years. I don't think you're going to get anybody to take him unless same thing. You're taking on a lot of the salary and you're sending draft picks. I think he's one of those assets that just doesn't have a lot of value right now. And other players that you're going to trade, like you're going to trade Pavel Zacha? I don't think so. Are you going to trade one of your D? I don't think so. I just don't see an asset that you're going to be able to move right now that makes sense. I honestly, my honest opinion, like I may even disagree with this a little bit, but I think the Bruins have put their plan in motion for what they want to do at the start of next year. They have $2 million in cap space. They have a full team going right now. I think they pretty much have everybody signed. Like everything's taken care of. There's not going to be any distractions. There's not going to be any holdouts. There's not going to be any drama like there was last year. And I think their hope is taking all that out of the equation, bringing in new coaches, that things are going to be better this year, and with the players that they brought in as well, like at least from a competitive standpoint. And the one-loss record should be a little better at the very least, and should be a lot better, frankly, and that they should compete for a wild card spot, and the games will certainly be more competitive on a regular basis. And I also think D-wise, they're not. There's no need to, I think, shore up the D at this point. Like they're going to roll with Lindholm and McAvoy and Zadorov and Jokiharju and Peak and Lowry and maybe Callahan as your seventh, or Jordan Harris as your seventh. And that's what they're going to roll with right now. I think that's what you're looking at, as long as people stay healthy. And that actually should be a pretty good decor. I was very encouraged that they brought Jokiharju back because I liked him. I thought he was good. Very solid, and he looked really good with Zadorov. So now you might have the ability to go McAvoy, Lindholm, Zadorov, Jokiharju as your top four and be really solid in your top four. And then you've got pretty good bottom pairing guys as well in Lowry and Peak. And you've got good depth if you've got Harris and Callahan as your next wave, your seventh and eighth when you get injuries. So I actually think there's no need to shore up the decor right now, as long as Hampus Lindholm is healthy. As long as he's healthy, I think they're going to be okay. And I think that should be a strength of the team. And it should be like defense, goaltending, building on out from there. And I think it's very easy to see how that could happen and will happen, just based on the personnel that they have and based on where their strengths lie. So I think that's something you definitely need to look at. And I think that's kind of the way it's going to be right now. Like, are they a top six forward short right now? If they're sort of fooling around with Middlestat being on the second line, or Zacha being the second line center, or having sort of a mystery candidate as your right wing on the second line right now, based on what you're going to do. Sure, I think they are. But I think that's something they can address at the trade deadline as they go on, while giving players looks to see if anybody can seize it, sort of like Morgan Geekie did last year. I think you always want to allow a little room for a guy like Geekie to really explode and develop and turn into something, and show you that he can do a job. And be something better than maybe what he was looked at or perceived to be when he got here. And I think he's done that. And you got to allow room for other players to be able to do that too. And then if they don't, you make that read and you go in and you get somebody at the trade deadline. I think that's a good way to do it. And I think that's the way they've always done it. And I think it drive fans nuts because it looks like at the beginning of the year, you're short on the roster, but that's something that they can fix as they're going along. And I think they've shown that they can do that in the past. So let's give a little time here and see how that develops. All right, let's take a break. Speaking of giving time, let's give time to our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Join over 10 million users and get started today. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and you watch the winnings roll right in. It's fun and it's super simple. PrizePicks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. On PrizePicks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports, combine your favorite hockey players with players from baseball, basketball, esports, and so much more. You can now win up to 2,000 times your money on PrizePicks, and they also offer Venmo, MasterCard, and Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Let's also let people know that you are listening to the Pucks with Haggs podcast on the CLNS network. And we ask that you subscribe to this podcast, like, and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS and enjoying all this hockey talk, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content with fellow Bruins talkers like Conor Ryan and Evan Marinofski. There's also the CLNS Media Network and Celtics All Access on CLNS, the NBA History Channel, Patriots Press Pass, and the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channels as well. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the instant a new Pucks with Haggs podcast video drops on the interwebs. All right, let us move on to the next question, and it's going to be from Svengoli10. This is also on the Boston Sports Journal Q&A. I heard on the radio that the Bruins are calling this a bridge year. Cripes, when we start using old Red Sox sayings, we are in trouble. It was also mentioned that the current roster is blocking younger players from coming up. I have to disagree. If you play well in camp, then you will probably get a shot. It's Svengoli10. Yeah, listen. There is constant whining from a faction of the Bruins fan base that the Bruins prospects are getting blocked. And this goes back to like Ryan Spooner, Anders Bjork, like go down the list. They talk about all these players, these young guys that aren't getting a shot because they're getting blocked by veteran players. And then these players go other places and they don't really do anything. And they're not able to show that they can handle it and that they're actual prospects. And that's the problem is if you can play, you're going to win a job. You know, you're going to end up pushing through and you're going to get a spot. Now, there's been a few players along the way that were in the Bruins system that didn't end up popping here that became established NHL players elsewhere that they probably could have used, like Frank Vetrano, Ryan Donato. Those are a couple names that come to mind that, you know, were to a degree blocked here or, you know, never fully got their opportunity to show what they could do here for one reason or another. And you could maybe make the argument with them. There's that there was a little bit of that, but they also didn't play well enough when they were here, I think, to really force that to happen, which is what you need. But for the most part, a lot of these players that you talk about getting blocked just aren't good enough to win spots and don't do it elsewhere. And that just tells you they're not really prospects. They were, you know, they were not bona fide NHL players. And guys like Georgi Merkulov and Fabian Lysell are kind of in that path right now where it's, you know, put up or shut up time. They have to win jobs. They have to take jobs away from veteran players. They have to overperform and really bring it in camp and at the beginning of the year to establish themselves. And I don't think either one of those, both of those guys got, you know, fairly decent looks at the NHL level last year and were not able to really seize it. Like they did okay. They had some moments, but they were not able to sustain it. And then Merkulov was hurt in the AHL playoffs for the Providence Bruins. Lysell was not great at all. He was scratched at I think at least once, maybe twice in the AHL playoff run for the Providence Bruins. And he was invisible a lot of the time. You just didn't notice him. And he wasn't able to make plays like some of the other guys were. Like, I watched a bunch of those games. I was there. Patra was excellent. Fraser Minton really did a good job. You know, the veteran guys that really stepped up, a bunch of them, and did well. Guys like Fabian Lysell didn't. He was not a guy that I noticed much at all, and he was not a guy that was making plays. He was not a guy that responded well to the level of intensity going up. And I remember the last series they were going up against the Charlotte Checkers. That was a team that had a bunch of NHL guys on it, and he didn't really do much against that team. And that's part of it. Is you've got to dominate at the level below your level if you really want to be looked at as a guy that is a prospect or a guy that's got a legit chance to make it in the NHL. And some guys do that and other guys don't. And then you've got guys like Don Lockmellis who came in at the end of the year from UMass and did really well with Providence towards the end of the season. But then in the playoffs, he looked like he was not ready for that step up in competition level and intensity level and all that stuff too. And it looked like he had a little bit of a hard time. And that's when he left and went to the Latvian team in the World Championships, which is probably a good move for him. But I think it showed, it really illustrated like how difficult it is at the ramped up level of even the AHL for a lot of these guys to shine and to show what they can do. And they have to be able to do that at that level before you can expect them to do it at the NHL level. There's a certain limit on excuse making for these young players if they're not getting the job done, and they're not like point per game players, guys that put up big goals. Like you can go a few years and say, yes, it's development. Yes, they're figuring it out. Like whatever. Like you can make excuses, injury excuses, whatever you want to do. But when they start to get in their third and fourth year in the AHL and they're still not like dominant players, it's time to reevaluate whether that guy's really a prospect or not. Like just flat out, no excuses, just point blank. That's the real talk. Like if you're not dominating the AHL by your third or fourth year there, you're not really an NHL prospect. You're becoming a guy that other people are passing you. You're being viewed differently by your organization. There's pessimism about whether you're ever going to make it. And, for whatever the reasons behind it, there's just not going to be, and this is for offensive players. There's different ways to dominate hockey games, and it's not just always about points and goals. But for a guy like Fabian Lysell, it's going to be about points and goals. Like he's expected to produce, bottom line. Same thing with Merkulov. So, we'll see what happens with them this year, but this is really like a crossroads year for them. I think it was Mark Diver we had on the podcast, and he mentioned that he had heard that Merkulov had asked for a trade last year because he was frustrated about like maybe the shots he was getting at the NHL level and sort of where he was at. But he did end up re-signing with the Bruins, and he's here again this year. So like it's really put up or shut up time in training camp where, there's jobs that you're going to be able to win and beat out a guy that's signed for 1 year, $900,000 at the NHL level. You're going to be able to beat out guys that, fellow young guys that are being looked at right now as potential, players that will be on the NHL roster. So it's time for them to do it. And I'm done hearing excuses for these kind of players being blocked because it's not happening. Like if they're better, they will win a job and they will be up there. The problem is they have not been better. And that's the issue. You need to start looking at the prospects instead of saying that the Bruins are blocking the prospects. Now, as far as the bridge year goes, I am okay with the use of the term because I think in this, it's not a bridge year where they expect to be bad like they were last year, right? That is not what the bridge year means here. I think what bridge year is and what they're talking about is maybe an expectation this year that they're not going to win the cup, which is okay. And more competing for the playoffs, trying to get in with a team that's gelling together, introducing some young guys, sort of continuing to rebuild on the fly, like all of that stuff. So I'm like okay with the conditional bridge year term if it's talking about competing for a wild card but knowing you're not going to win the cup this year, unless crazy like great things break great for you. Like it would take a lot for the Bruins to turn into Stanley Cup contenders this year. I don't see it. Like they've obviously got some talented players. I think it's more about like just building up from last year, building up in a really tough competitive division, and maybe sneaking into the wild card that is going to be very competitive with Toronto, with Florida, with Tampa, with Ottawa, with Montreal, with all these teams. Detroit is trying to like build back up too. And one of these years Buffalo is going to surprise because they got a bunch of great young talent. You would expect at some point they're going to at least put it together to the point where they could threaten to get in the playoffs. So it's going to be a really good division. It's going to be really hard for them. It's more about, I think, seeing progress with how they're playing, with being competitive, with putting themselves back in the wild card discussion and being there for this year. And I think it's, a couple of year plan to build them back up to be Stanley Cup contenders. That's where I think the bridge year thing comes. Also, when talking about like the big free agent class that's potentially there after this season, Jack Eichel, Connor McDavid, Kaprizov, Kyle Connor, like there's a bunch of names, offense, forward and defense. They're going to be potentially available. Harley from Dallas was another one that I saw on there. Like there's some really good players that could be available. And if it's getting you to next year where you can land one of those big players and it sort of sets everybody else into a different spot in the lineup and it really like adds to your talent level to be able to like put you back in that conversation. Like, I think that's what they're talking about. It's about like starting to build things back the right way this year, getting back on track, maybe getting to the playoffs, and then really adding when you have a chance to this next summer, with a free agency crop right now looks like it's going to be on steroids. that I think is more realistic. I think that makes sense. And I think it's also like, that's not fully adopting saying, oh, it's going to be a bridge year, they're going to suck. I think that's immediately what fans think when you say bridge year, is this team's going to be terrible this year, they're going nowhere. No, in the NHL, bridge year could mean let's get back into the playoffs after missing last year and being really, really bad. And then, we'll continue to build towards maybe 2 years from now, thinking the Stanley Cup is a legit, aspiration and might be within reach. Or like something you can start to shoot for. I think that's kind of what the bridge year term is here too, especially looking at the free agents that are available next year versus the free agent crop this year that was not great. That was not a great class of free agents, and it was probably smart not to spend huge money on them this year, and make sure you were spending money when it really counts, or when you really think you're going to get value for it in next year's free agency. All right, this is from Duncan Sewell in Souk. Does drafting Hagens address the offensive question sufficiently, given he's closer to being ready than the other potential prospects were? Will Sweeney and company shift their free agency focus to address that hole and lack of depth on the blue line? Well, we know the free agency answer, like, not really. Like, they brought in Jokiharju to address the hole on the blue line, on the right side, where they needed to bring in another player, and I think that sufficiently addresses it for now. I think they've got 6 good, solid defensemen, and they're in good spots where they should be too, which is important. And really, it could look even different, much different than, and better than it does right now, if Lowry really like takes a step forward this year, in his proper spot, maybe working with Steve Spott on the power play and being a point guy. You can start to see where things could really fall into place for him to have a very, very good season and a nice bounce back year, especially motivated after being having the worst plus minus mark in the NHL last year too. I think the pieces are there, and the everything is there for him to have a really big rebound year as well. And if that happens, I think their back end looks a lot different and looks really, really good. And if Hampus Lindholm can stay healthy, I think that's another question as well. But I think back end, they're kind of set for right now. The drafting of Hagens is interesting, and I think it might address some of the offensive questions, but I think it's also going to be a few years down the line before he's really going to be like a offensive force potentially that you could build around. I think it might take him a year or two to get to that point. So you're talking about wanting things in place to not put too much pressure on him next year, assuming that he's going to be ready next year, which I think everybody assumes. So, you have Middlestat in place for another year after this coming season. You've got other players in place as well. Obviously, Lindholm is going to be there, Elias Lindholm and Geeky and Pasta. And it's about sort of building that second line, maybe, or third line, depending on where you want to put Hagens, to have players around him. And maybe they're already viewing him as a third line center to start, and having a guy like Jeannot with him, because it seems like that's something they're envisioning at points, is having him out there to give plenty of space to a guy like Hagens and to protect him a little bit. I think that'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But I think it does answer some offensive questions, and it does take care of some things, but I think you also want extreme depth down the middle. And I think that's where you talk about maybe next year getting, like, in an ideal world, they sign Jack Eichel. He becomes number 1 center. Elias Lindholm slots down to number 2 center. Hagen starts as number 3 center, to let him get his feet wet in the NHL. And then as things develop, as a season or two goes by, you probably see Hagens go up to second line center, Elias Lindholm slide down to third line center, where I think a couple of years from now, he's going to be a third line center. And then it becomes, how long can Jack Eichel be your 1C, and how long is Hagens your 2C before they flip-flop and Hagens is ready to sort of take that on as well. And I think that's, but that's years down the road. That could be 2, 3, 4 years from now if all that comes into play. This is an extreme theoretical situation that I'm throwing out there, but it kind of, I think, should give you a little bit of a look into how the Bruins could be projecting things over the next few years. And how it could all work out for them. If you're talking a couple years from now, where Hagens is on an entry level. Elias Lindholm is an expensive sign, no doubt. But if it balances off, if Hagens is on an entry level and you're paying him like 8 or close to it, and then you're paying a guy like Eichel 10, 11, 12, whatever it is, and I think you start to see how it could come together, how you could work with that, and how that could build you back up to be like a legit contender. Like I said, theoretical, hypothetical, whatever you want to call it, but I think that's when you have a talent like Hagens coming in. I think you can start to sort of think in those terms and think about ways that you can build up your roster without putting too much pressure on him and too much expectation early, and not turning it into a Connor Bedard situation where you're expecting him to be the savior from day one and expecting him to come in and really be this great player. And he kind of wasn't ready for it and still doesn't seem like he's quite ready for it, based on the talent level around him and based on him as a player as well. So I think you also want to be careful about not throwing too much to a guy like that and not, putting too much on his plate and too much expectation on his shoulders before you actually start to see what he can do at the NHL level. But this is all cart before the horse stuff, because you're going to need to see Hagens dominate at Boston College this coming season before you start to even put any of this in motion. So these are all tentative plans, but you could see where that could be like thought of as a possibility if Hagens blows people away at BC, is one of the best players in the country, dominates Hockey East, shows that he's ready for the NHL next year, or 2 years from now, I should say, not this coming season, but the season after. Then you can start to sort of formulate other plans and really start to build things around that as being a certainty rather than a possibility. But I don't think the Bruins are quite there yet. But good question. All right, last question from JMuse45. I'd have offer sheeted Cuylle, the Rangers Cuylle, $6 million a year. Rangers are capped out. He's perfect for second line with Hagens. With skill and physicality, Jeannot can't protect him. He'll either be playing up too high or trying to fight multiple shifts later when they'll just turtle like Ulf Samuelsson. Okay, so Cuylle got $3.9 million per year from the Rangers. You would have paid him $6. You would have offer sheeted him $6. I don't like, and he's coming off one good year. He had 20 goals this past season. I think he had like 12 goals the year before, like 20 points. And he really had a bit of a breakout year this past year. And you're going to pay him more than Morgan Geekie, who had 30 goals and 60 points or whatever it was last year. I'm not bringing in a guy like that and paying him more than one of your players you just signed, who you want to be happy and productive. And, a guy that the Rangers deemed not worth more than 3.9, I would not be giving him 6. That's not the guy I would overpay. There's some decent restricted free agents out there. There's some guys even now that are still unsigned that, that could be worth thinking about rearranging things for. I think the one guy that is interesting is Mason McTavish. You hear his name potentially out there with the Ducks as a guy they're not going to pay, as a guy they can't afford, as a guy that's been pretty productive and been a pretty decent player. That guy is interesting. That guy might be somebody I'd think if it comes at the right price, might be worth moving some things around, trading some assets, all that stuff. Might be worth thinking about. But I also am just not sure the Bruins are in a position to do that at this point and really start sort of getting into a position where they're desperate to move players, move money, move whatever, and have to start giving up assets that they don't want to because the desperation is there to make it happen. If something like that made sense and it fell into their laps, or if it was minimal as far as the damage they would have to do to the roster, to their treasure trove of prospects and draft picks and all that other stuff, might be worth it. But like overpaying a guy like Cuylle by a couple of $1 million a year is not it. I would not have done that. And the Bruins didn't, and didn't overpay for an asset like that that's coming off one good season. So that's a good thing for them. All right. Thank you very much for the questions, everybody. Appreciate everybody listening. This is the Pucks with Haggs podcast, a proud member of the CLNS Media Network. Make sure to hit subscribe to the Bruins and Rinkside YouTube channel and turn on notifications for when a new video drops. on the channel. The show is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS and PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, thanks everybody else out there for listening. Thanks for the questions. We will see you next week with 2 episodes. For now, take it easy, and I'll see you at the ring.